In this episode of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska,
I made up my mind. I would base my decisions on camaraderie and trust and loosen my control. Tonight, we were going to be 4 men working together to survive.
Dave Frey gets trapped in the wilderness with 4 boys from the Fairbanks Youth Facility medium security jail, and David Bowen sees something in a reclusive student that no other teachers have seen.
I figured he was sleeping or tuned out, but get this. When I call on him, to my surprise, he's never tuned out.
Exceeding Expectations, up next on Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska. I'm Rob Prince. In 1995, Dave Frey was a youth counselor in the boys' treatment unit of the Fairbanks Youth Facility, a medium-security jail housing kids from 15 to 18 years old. While he was there, he formed a running club for the boys. One day, he decided to take them out on a little hiking adventure in the wilderness of interior Alaska. Here's Dave.
On Labor Day weekend, I arranged an off-unit pass for 4 of my runners. My plan was to hike the 15-mile Granite Tours Trail. Each of us packed warm clothes, a rain jacket, water, and sandwich meals from the food service. At 11:30 a.m., we gleefully exited the facility. After we buckled up, one of the youth, Max, asked, "Are we going to stop at a store for some snacks, Mr. Frey? We're going to burn a lot of calories, and we need snacks, right?" I drove to Super Value, and they selected chips, candy, soda, etc. One of the guys, Kenny, picked up 2 giant Hershey's chocolate bars. Kind of excessive, I thought, but I let it go. It had poured rain all week, and we had to idle through a flooded stretch of Chena Hot Springs Road in order to reach the trailhead. Time-wise, we were already behind schedule. We parked and crossed the road. By afternoon, we were sweating in our t-shirts. Resting briefly every hour, everyone's spirits were high, even Max, who, in his brand new hiking boots, had developed a raw abrasion wound on his right foot. I helped him bandage the wound. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine," insisted Max, anticipating my concern. "I don't want to hold us up. I'll keep up, no matter what." Later, I could see clouds descending in the distance. When we came to a fork in the trail, I saw an opportunity. "Hey guys, we could take this side trail to the first Granite Tour and then return to the main trail here and go back the way we came. It'd make for an easier pace since we're behind schedule." Their disapproval was unanimous. Brandon, the most outgoing of the youth, spoke for the group. "Please, Mr. Frey, we want to hike the whole trail. We really don't want to go back now." 8 pleading eyes met mine. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and we continued on the main trail. As we reached the higher elevations, we began to see snow on the trail. Doubt began to enter my mind as we encountered a snow-covered boulder field. The trail disappeared, but we were able to follow the occasional rock cairn to make our way. The young men rose to the challenge, tossing an occasional snowball as we stepped our way across the slippery boulders, and the clouds continued to roll toward us. Eventually, the trail opened up to a snowy tundra meadow with no discernible route. By now, we were in the cloud, and a light snow began to fall. Our extra clothing was barely enough now. I thought of turning back, but by now we were near the halfway point. It was too late. Then, a moment of good fortune. A shelter cabin. This was our chance to warm up. We settled into the cabin and made hot chocolate on my Esbit stove. It felt so good to be comfortable, even though it put us further behind schedule. I hoped that somehow the fog would clear, but it was getting worse. We ventured into the elements again. Shortly afterward, we reached the end of the meadow, with no rock cairns or other signs of the trail. I instructed the guys to fan out in the distance to search for the trail while I stayed put in order to keep our place and direction. After about 15 minutes, they all returned with bad news. No trail in sight. At this point, I selected a route forward that I hoped would lead us back to the Suburban. I noticed that a shallow stream bed was just beginning to form to our right. Hopefully, it would lead us to the Chena River. We descended, trying to stay in the stream bed, but often having to bushwhack. It was slow going, putting us further behind schedule. Not only that, but Max was falling behind the pace. I could see him trying not to wince. At one point, I suggested that we assess Max's injured foot. "I'm good," Mr. Frey said. "I'll keep up. Don't worry about me." We descended below the fog, and it was no longer snowing. We could finally see again. On the other hand, it was starting to get dark. Earlier, my biggest concern had been returning to the unit late. Now it was dawning on me that we might not make it back before nightfall, possibly even getting dangerously lost. In addition to the hiking challenges, I was beginning to ponder whether I was going to be fired for this. Things like this are just not supposed to happen at the Fairbanks Youth Facility, where safety, security, and predictability were paramount values. Damn. Why hadn't I insisted that we turn around a long time ago? Why hadn't I scheduled our hike to begin earlier in the day for a greater margin of error? Why did I agree to stop at the grocery store? I also had to decide about how to approach the reality that I was hiking with 4 potentially dangerous and unpredictable young men. During my tenure, a group of residents had stolen a staff person's car while on a pass. There had also been 2 thwarted escape attempts involving potential injury to staff, including myself. I not only had the keys to the Suburban, I had the keys to the entire Fairbanks Youth Facility in my pocket. If the guys were to overpower me and find their way back to the Suburban, they could be long gone before anyone would know to look for them. Back on the unit, there were protocols in place to keep the residents under control. Without the usual structure, I felt vulnerable. I made up my mind. I would base my decisions on camaraderie and trust and loosen my control. Tonight, we were going to be 4 men working together to survive. We were all walking with determination, but the darkness was accelerating, and I began looking for a place to spend the night. It took me a half hour to find it, a flat, rocky creekside area with small trees nearby for firewood. I gathered the 4 young men. "Guys, we're going to have to spend the night here. It's getting too dark to hike safely. If we work together, we can build a fire and stay warm. I'm going to stay here and gather rocks for the base of our fire. Your job is to gather enough wood to burn all night. Once we have enough wood, we'll break it up and start the fire. I know this isn't the way you were expecting things to turn out. Let's try to make the best of it. Tonight, we're going to find out what we're made of. The most important thing is to work together. If we do that, everything will turn out just fine." In the twilight, I gathered a dozen flat rocks and built a decent hearth, while the young men gathered an abundance of small spruce trees and branches. We broke the branches and separated them by size. We carefully wiped the moisture off the tiniest twigs and stacked them into a loose pile. Brandon seemed eager to light the fire, and I handed him the matchbook. He struck a match. His match went out. "I'll give it a try now," I said, trying to sound casual. I carefully lit the fire. Once it started burning, we added more tiny twigs to it, and then larger and larger sticks. Eventually, we had a crackling fire. We arranged some of the largest sticks about a foot over the flames in the shape of a teepee. Whenever the flames died down, we would collapse the now dry teepee of sticks into the fire and rebuild the teepee with a new set of damp sticks to repeat the process. Meanwhile, my wife Lori was wondering why I hadn't returned home from my shift. She called the Fairbanks Youth Facility to inquire. The evening supervisor there informed her that I hadn't returned from the hike. He had no news of my whereabouts, and there were no plans for a search party. He added, Considering the kind of young men we're dealing with here, it's hard to say what might have happened to them. After a few hours of tossing and turning, Lori called two friends, Robert Whedon and Matthew Sturm, to form a search party, along with my father-in-law, a doctor who happened to be visiting from North Carolina. Around the fire, we got surprisingly comfortable. We dried our boots and socks. We speculated about how the youth facility staff and residents might be responding to our disappearance. Every time a plane flew overhead, we rose to our feet, waved our arms, and called out to the plane, "Hey, here we are!" then laughed about it. At one point, Brandon asked, "Hey, Mr. Frey, do you like the Beatles?" "Of course. Do you remember that song, Help? How does it go?" And Brandon began to sing, "Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you being round." I chimed in, and some of the others sang too. That led to a general Beatles sing-along, which interrupted our conversation at various times throughout the night. The young men continued to talk about life as a youth facility resident, their lives, their past, their hopes, all with a candor that would never have been shared on the unit. I gained a deeper appreciation for how difficult it was for them to have lost total control over their own lives. There was enough room around the fire for one person at a time to lay down and take a nap for an hour or two. The young men took turns. Finally, late into the night, I did something that would ordinarily be unthinkable for a youth counselor. I took a turn to lay down and fall asleep. Eventually, the darkness began to break. We didn't have any food, or so I thought, but at least we had enough hot chocolate for each of us. Then Kenny reached into his backpack. Our eyes widened as Kenny revealed his last giant Hershey's chocolate bar. He carefully broke it into pieces and passed it around, finally taking a piece himself. It was truly the tastiest, the most satisfying piece of chocolate I have ever had in my life. We stirred dirt over the fire, and then we ritually doused the remaining hot coals, as only a group of young men could do. Eventually, the hiking got easier, with a little less bushwhacking. Gaining confidence, we picked up speed. Every once in a while, I'd call out, "Hey!" in hopes that somebody hiking the trail would hear me. At one point, I heard a reply. Then we saw a man in the distance. We forded the shallow stream and strode toward him. It was Matthew Sturm, my next-door neighbor. By the time we reached Matthew, he had fired up his camp stove to heat a pot of tea. He offered us power bars. Not far away were Lori, Robert, and my father-in-law. I introduced this rescue team to my hiking partners. Lori and I had a long, warm embrace. We all conversed for a while, then headed down the trail. We exited the parking lot and headed for the youth facility. Few words were spoken. As we drove, I could feel reality sinking in. We had just thrived a surreal experience. Last night was timeless, magic, and so free. In our focus on survival, our everyday lives had faded into the background. Now, for the young men, the reality of their predicament, the life of incarceration that they were about to return to, was sinking in. I could feel the magic just draining away. Soon they all fell asleep. The reality of my own situation was also taking shape. Would I still have a job? When we entered the youth facility, I was jolted by the slamming of the cold steel door behind me. Bracing myself, I took a deep breath as I walked through another steel door to the unit. "Welcome back," the day shift supervisor said with a wry smile. After the young men walked to their rooms, he asked, "Hey, Dave, someone called in sick for their PM shift. How'd you like to work some overtime?" "I'm not sure I still have a job," I retorted. Don't worry, I've already spoken at length with Mr. Long about it. You did fine. You definitely still have a job, he informed. Thanks, but I don't think I could stay awake for an overtime shift, I replied. I called Lori for a ride home and exited the building. We were all safe. What could have been a nightmare turned out to be my finest hours as a Fairbanks Youth Facility youth counselor.
Dave Frey. This is Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska, the Exceeding Expectations episode. I'm Rob Prince. As a college professor for over 20 years now, I've had my fair share of students who put their head down in class and look like they're sleeping. My response is generally to kick them out of class, but that's not how David Bowen opted to address one quote-unquote sleeping kid in his 10th grade English class at Effie Cochran School in Fairbanks. Here's David.
Dennis was too tall for a 10th grader. Teachers often spot big boys like him and think, there's a kid who's been held back a few years, a struggler. On the first day of school in August, I had my students write a 2-paragraph description of themselves, not only as a way for me to get to know them, but also to get a sample of their writing ability. Denny's paper was memorable. He wrote only one short line, and his handwriting was indecipherable. It sure seemed like he was one of those left-behind kids. From the start, I liked him. He was taciturn but respectful whenever I would talk with him, usually avoiding conversation with clipped one-word responses. I can't remember a time when he ever came to class in the company of a friend. Invariably, though, he was the first student to arrive in my room, well before homeroom, typically slipping in unnoticed, taking his back row seat, and laying his head on the desk without a sound. When I'd greet him, though, he always answered softly and without eye contact. "Good morning, Mr. B." One October afternoon, before heading home for the day, I stayed late, writing a quiz to be handed out in class the next day. When I took it to the staff workroom to make copies, I was surprised to see another teacher there. "Hey, Mr. Snow. Looks like I'm not the only idiot working late here today." "Yeah, you got that right, David," he grinned. Though I'd only known Josh Snow for 1 year, I really respected him, both for his easy way around the students and for his work ethic. A veteran teacher here at Effie Cochran Charter School, he taught most of the social studies classes while I taught English. "So, Josh, I've been meaning to ask you something. You know that big 10th grader, Denny?" "Yeah. Puts his head down a lot. Writes about like a first grader." "Yeah," I replied. "He's almost always got his head on his desk in my class, too. And at first that really bugged me because I figured he was sleeping or tuned out. But get this. When I call on him, to my surprise, he's never tuned out. He's right on top of the discussion. And even more surprising, he's got stronger, better ideas than most of the other kids in class. I tell you, this kid is no dummy." "I think you're right," said Josh. "He's a bright kid. For some reason, he's just laying low." The next day in class, I had an opportunity to put Denny to the test. As part of a lesson on paragraph writing, I was at the overhead projector, soliciting the students' ideas to compose a narrative description of a catastrophic event, a house fire that we had just read about in Jimmy Huntington's autobiography, On the Edge of Nowhere. After several of the students had tossed in a few supporting details, responses dwindled. "Okay, come on now, you guys. We got a good start here, but this paragraph just doesn't feel done to me. There's more to tell, don't you think? What else?" No hands went up, not even the front row kids. All I could see of Denny, as usual, was the top of his head. "Denny, help us out here." A pause as all eyes turned to observe him. Horrified. What was that, Denny? Horrified, he repeated without raising his head. Jimmy thought his son was in there, in the fire. He was horrified. The room went silent. Several of the students in the front row craned around to look at the kid with his head on the desk. And I resolved to pay better attention to what this kid couldn't seem to write. Maybe he could. Over the years, Denny had become accustomed to not being listened to. It seemed to me that he did not value his own ideas. For teachers, this is one of the most perplexing aspects of our work. Getting kids to believe in themselves, to believe that their ideas are worth sharing. I wondered about Denny's written work. So scant and scribbly, and I decided to spend more time on it. I knew that K-3 teachers often develop a great skill at decoding their young students' scribbles and invented spellings. But I had always been a high school teacher and was unpracticed in these ways. Still, as I took the time to scrutinize Denny's scrawl more closely, my suspicions were again confirmed. He did have some solid and original ideas, just lousy writing skills. I cranked up the feedback, wrote out responses to his responses, and praised him when he came up with interesting opinions or insights. As the weeks and months went by, Denny started to write longer sentences. Then, amazingly, little paragraphs. He was starting to believe he had something to say. Before I knew it, the school year had all but passed, and it was the week of finals. I hit my classes with a pretty heavy-duty exam, including a lot of paragraph writing and even a short essay. The students suffered through finals week and went home, glad to be done with academics. The few remaining days of the school year would be reserved for special activities, presentations, and the last day picnic. I took their exams home and graded them all weekend. At 10 o'clock on Sunday night, the stack of yet-to-be-graded papers had become happily thin. At last I came to Denny's exam. He had written a 2-paragraph, I'd only asked for one, 2-paragraph narrative description of a character from a novel that we had read that fall. His ideas were clear and well-organized, richly detailed. On the last page of his exam was the essay, in which he expressed his own sentiments about Romeo and Juliet, focusing on Friar Lawrence's motives, blunders, strengths, and weaknesses. The essay was by far the best piece of writing Daniel had ever produced, and it thrilled me. I had to share it with Kirsty. I read his essay to her out loud, and she immediately said, "David, you need to call his parents." I looked over at the clock. "Honey, it's 10:30. I can't call these people this late on a school night." She looked me straight in the eye and said, "David, do you really think his parents would mind having a teacher call them, even at midnight, to tell them that their son, who has probably never once in his life had a good call home, has just hit a home run in your class?" Still, I hesitated. "Here," she said, "tell me the number and I'll dial for you." As the phone rang in my ear, I tried to remember Denny's parents, what they looked like, who they were. Oh, I thought, that's right. They were among the few parents who never came to parent-teacher conferences, who probably had given up years ago. Suddenly, a man's unfamiliar voice. "Hello, my name is David Bowen, one of Denny's teachers at the school. I apologize for this late call tonight, but you see, I was just grading the last of my students' final exams, and, well, I came to your son's paper, and, It's one of the best pieces of writing I've gotten from any of my students. I just thought you'd want to know how proud I am. There was a sharp knock, and then silence. Straining into the phone, I heard low voices in the background. Finally, just as I was about to hang up, a woman's voice, timid but polite. "Hello, this is Dennis's mother." I went on to repeat my accolades for Denny's, for his remarkable work on his exam, and for my pleasure in having had him in my class all year. After I'd hung up the phone, I hugged Kirsty in thanks for her insistence. Without her, I would never have made that call. The next morning before school, I was busy on my classroom computer, routinely prepping for the day when Denny arrived, first student in the door as usual. He slid into his spot in the back row, head on the desk immediately, the customary sequence and posture. Absorbed in my typing, I muttered absent-mindedly, "Morning, Denny." "Morning, Mr. B," came the standard reply. Then several minutes of silence as I went about my work. Suddenly Denny's head shot up, and he blurted out, "Did you call my house last night, Mr. Bowen?" I looked across the room at him, trying to get a read on his agitation. Was he angry, excited, or just curious? "Well, actually, yes, I did call last night. You see, I was up late grading all those final exams, and then I came to yours, and holy smokes, Denny, you wrote a really awesome paper. Your best writing ever." "You made my dad cry," he interrupted in a loud, quavering voice. "He just dropped the phone and couldn't talk. Mr. B, I've never seen my dad cry." And then Denny composed himself and continued. "And then my mom picked up the phone and talked a little, and later when I asked her what was wrong, she said, nothing."
David Bowen. He's now a retired English teacher from F.B. Cochran School in Fairbanks. Thanks for listening to this edition of Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska, the Exceeding Expectations episode. Today's episode was edited by Ryan Peterson and myself. Story consultation by Lori Neufeld. Remember, these are the stories we tell up here in Alaska on Dark Winter Nights. I'm Rob Prince.